Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker. I do want to start with a statement that Paula Potch, thank you, provided for me. You're currently sitting on the campus of Elon University, which was founded in 1889 in a stand of oaks on land that the Occaneechi Band of Saponi Nation and other Central North Carolina and Eastern North American Native American groups did and still call home. As we gather together in this space, we do so with and in the spirit of those groups, which is with respect, love, and care. So today I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Joseph Robertson, who's an enrolled member of the Sistone Wahpeton Oyate of the Lake Traverse Reservation, and he's the founder of the founder and chief data scientist of Mato Ohitika Analytics. He's committed to speaking with students, faculty, community members, and grassroots organizations about the broader educational and citizen science initiatives to bring the Indigenous perspective Praxis' holistic data science workflow designs to underrepresented communities and to provide equitable access through building academic, cultural, and community partnerships. Dr. Robertson holds a Ph.D. in computational science and statistics and a Master's of Science in Statistics from South Dakota State University and a Bachelor's of Science in Mathematics from Colorado State University. So I'm particularly excited to introduce Dr. Robertson. He's going to talk a lot about the Indigenous perspectives practice, but he has so many projects that he could talk to you about. So be curious, ask questions. I'm sure he'll stick around later to answer any questions. He's just really excited to engage with all of you. So take the opportunity to do so. And I also say that we're fairly informal, so get up and help yourself to some more food if you feel like you need to. Yeah, have some fun. Welcome, Joseph.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Krista for inviting me to Elon University. I really appreciate being able to kind of showcase some of my work that I do as a data scientist. I just wanted to first, maybe as I introduce myself, can you all, for us in our kinship, it's like we always want to know kind of who do I have in the room here. So I've talked to a few students here about what their majors are. Can you tell me like where you're coming from, what school or what major, so I can get a little bit to know who's in the room? You can just yell it out. You math major, liberal arts? Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a math guy. I met him last night. Anyone else?
Business analytics.
Business analytics. Library. Engineering. Anyone else want to share?
Finance and data analytics.
Okay. Well, I currently am an adjunct professor at South Dakota State University. So the work I do in teaching statistics and our programming, I have lots of different students from different majors in AI and data science and math and statistics. So it's just good to see a broad swath of students that are doing different things with their undergraduate work. Today's talk, I wanted to really focus this, mostly my work is focused on student-centric ideas of like, how do we promote education in data science? How do we build partnerships and community partnerships? How do we learn about who we are as people? I'm a First Nations people. I'll kind of introduce myself here in a second. But really what I wanted to do is really open up this idea of looking at this. I've created this idea called the Indigenous perspective Praxis. It's a holistic data science workflow, a set of designs for building community partnerships and for education and citizens engagement. So my name is Dr. Joseph Robertson. I'm the Chief Data Scientist of Mato Ohitika Analytics. Like Krista said, I'm a Dakota citizen of the Sistine Wahpeton, the Sissetuan Wahpeton Oyate of the Lake Traverse Reservation. And like Krista mentioned my education, I have a Ph.D. in computational science and statistics, a master in statistics, and my undergraduate degrees in mathematics. I also was a highly qualified mathematics teacher where I taught in the Indian education system, where I taught middle school, I taught high school, I was adjunct, and I taught college algebra at the local community college. So I'm an educator through and through all these years. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of my kinship chronology. We're storytellers as Native people. We have oral culture that transcends the things that we talk about our experience, our lived experiences, the things that we do as far as like telling our story. When I gave a similar talk in Chicago just a few months ago, I was thinking about how would I actually use this kind of kinship chronology that's part of the research that I do, but also to like think about in the last like 5 years, where have I been and where was I and where are we going and where are we going next? So through the process and evolution of exploring Native kinship systems, my company, Mātou Hitike Analytics, has continued to develop community partnerships, one aspect in acting towards data for good. So as we reflect back using Native storytelling of the work I've done in many communities since this first Academic Data Science Alliance talk I did in October of 2020, it's a pretty good story, so I just wanted to show you a few highlights. So in 2017, for those of you that are undergraduate students, I think probably the majority of students are undergrads here, I was working on my master's and my Ph.D. from 2012 to 2018. In 2017, I became a Ph.D. candidate, and I founded my company, Mātou Hitike Analytics. And so I decided to host and develop this idea of like data sovereignty. What does data sovereignty mean? What's Indigenous data sovereignty? So I decided to like tackle that as like a dissertation topic. I completed my dissertation and successfully defended in 2018. And I completed my dissertation, The Impact of Data Sovereignty on American Indian Self-Determination, a framework proof of concept using data science. In 2020, I was approached by the Academic Data Science Alliance, and I gave this was during COVID, so everything was remote, but I gave this talk about data science and the Indigenous perspective primers that I'll talk a little bit about here in a few minutes. But I had created this initiative called Using Data Science to Remaster the Past, Understanding Our Shared History initiative. I partially revealed that during that first talk. So it was really all these ideas that I had thought that I wanted to come up with. I wanted to found a company so I could do what I wanted to do. And so I decided that I wanted to try and work for myself and work on behalf of Native communities. And so this was kind of the journey. In 2021, I gave a presentation at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte School of Data Science. That was also remote. They asked me to actually craft a land acknowledgement for them. So I had done some already GIS work that I'll show you here in just a second. And so we had talked about indigenous financial context, and we did a panel with some of the local tribal members that are here in North Carolina. In 2021, I was part of the International Society for Digital Earth, and I gave a presentation there about the primers of AI ethics and my work in looking at how I could take our language and do a study and understand these ideas of the United Nations AI Charter that they had just drafted, and then kind of how do you apply that in this context of decolonization in research. In 2022, I came back to South Dakota State where I got my master's and PhD, and I did a 3-part series on the data science work I was doing in federal Indian law, the Data Sovereignty Initiative Framework applications, which is basically the designs of my dissertation. And then I also did an AI demo of Dakota language integration using simple machine learning algorithms, such as cosine similarity, word to vec, bag of words. I mean, this was 2022, and like fast forward today, and like those algorithms are like, I mean, they're like very simple compared to what we have now. So it's just amazing to see the evolution of where you students are in like this new AI era. So in 2022, I also gave my first land sessions mapping and decolonization exercises with students at the University of Minnesota Geoscience Alliance workshop. So I'll show you some of the maps that I've created that were exercises. In 2023, I designed and executed my first decolonized internship program where Native American students were allowed to actually go home during the summer to their tribal communities. And so they developed projects for their own community while they were under the internship of my company. And it went phenomenally. I mean, to know that if for Native people and for, for other groups too, that, we have kinship responsibilities with our family members. So, the old way when I did research experience when I was an undergraduate, I did one at Harvard a long, long time ago. But, I was in the dorms there for 10 weeks away from my family. And that was, when I was that young, I always wanted to come home. And my mom was like, you have to stay. But anyway, the idea here is that as we evolved, the Native students one of them that I had with my colleague Kyle Monahan here on the right is we had students from Tufts that were Native American. And when I first came to visit, I had met the student. She asked me for an internship. And so she was able to go home, and we were able to have her use Zoom and to use remote access to actually work on her project and be back with her own people in Arizona. So it was really, really a cool thing. That's still going on today. Okay, in 2023 also, my Tufts data science Kyle Monahan, who's here with me today, we began collecting large language model samples from ChatGPT right when it came out, and other models. And we've been examining the harms of AI using data science remasters of decolonized digital twins. So I'll show that here in just a minute. We also began work on this paper requested by the International Society for Digital Earth, and that's where the Indigenous perspective praxis was really born. So this idea, I'll show you all these concepts. And last year, Kyle and his colleague Peter, we wrote this position paper about the Indigenous perspective praxis, chronicling data science workflows, decolonization methodologies, big tech gutting their ethics divisions and AI ethic workshops, and Dakota language AI integrations and studies done in partnership with our data science folks at Tufts University. So the paper didn't go well. They didn't really understand it. They rejected it. They didn't really understand like native kinship or anything. So the peer reviewers they just didn't understand. So it was a good lesson in knowing that just because somebody rejects the paper doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. It's just that's academia for you. But on the other side, I gave a talk at the Tufts Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and the Fletcher Forums, which is a print magazine there, requested that I design and write something about the Indigenous perspective praxis in my work in geo-AI voting systems for their summer print issue last year. And so I was the first Native author to ever be published in that forum. And so that's some of my work that I do in strengthening democracy, where I've been working in voting projects with different tribal communities across the US to help with the voter suppression that's happening with Native communities. Okay, and then finally this kind of last few bits here, I presented my current work at the Native Nations Summit at the Esri User Conference. That's the company that makes the ArcGIS software. I also do advanced GIS solutions, so I integrate that into my data science workflows. This year, Kyle and myself, we took additional ChatGPT samples in our third annual workshop at Tufts, working with students, expanding our research to advanced system prompts in GPTs. And then we also expanded our AI ethics, and we presented at Data Science for Good on these two groundbreaking pieces of work in Chicago just a few months ago. I also had 2 interns for the summer who were international students. So my dissertation work actually transcended what I was originally designed for just tribal communities. And I had a student from Africa and one from India that re-engineered my data sovereignty framework into something that they could use for their home communities in another country. So it was really amazing to see students evolving and taking this kind of work and re-engineering for something that will benefit their own community. Really awesome stuff. And then finally, we developed an additional AI breakthrough for the visit here at Elon, the student-centric activity in modifying system prompts to study the NLP and biases instructed in LLM to do something outside of its programming. So the workshop tomorrow at 4:30, we've developed basically a large language model as like a plug and play in an SSD. And your job will be to think about, if you come to the workshop, if you could design a system prompt that you tell it exactly what it should say, then we're going to query it and see what happens. So when the work that I do with, let's say, asking what's the Fort Laramie Treaty to an AI, we've got some very interesting results that are part of the workshop in the morning at 9:30, where we've jailbroken an AI model, and then asked it about the treaty and the history, and then jailbroke it, and then told it to just tell the truth, and it's pretty interesting what came out of that. I'll give you a little hint at the end anyway, So land acknowledgements, I do a lot of different ideas, so like looking at land acknowledgements, especially with our shared history in the US. So here, this is kind of a powerful way to show that American Indian reservations in the continental United States, the pre-colonial American Indian land base of all US territories is 3.5 million square miles. Okay, this is the post-colonial American Indian land base of all US territories, which is 87,800 square miles. So currently, American Indians in their land dispossession, the current reservation land base approximately fits in the size of Idaho. This is always something that I want to show students who I visit. This is the 9 reservations in South Dakota. I'm part of the Lake Traverse Reservation. That's where I'm enrolled at the Sissetuan Wakpetuan Oyate. And so these are mostly the Oceti Sakowin people, the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota people. And here, historically, the Native Americans that comprise the Great Sioux Nation consist of those 7 council fires, like I said. And so this is actually the 7 districts where we're all enrolled, and so I call Old Agency my home. Every time I go to give a talk somewhere in the US, I usually do something with grabbing historical documents from like the early 1900s or wherever it was. This was one with Whose Land Are You On? This is from Albert Kroeber's work with Indigenous, this book he wrote in 1920s, I think. But I challenge students that whose land does Tufts University sit on in Boston? And so I've crafted a lot of these to help students better understand this idea of what exactly is a land acknowledgement. In San Diego, when I was at the Esri User Conference, again, I asked folks in the audience, whose land are you on in San Diego County? So again, these are like all these different kind of remastering of like the past that I'll show a little bit more. This is where we were at Trinity Christian College in Chicago just a few months ago. And again, I had remastered this judicial boundaries of the Indian Claims Commission. So we were asking where does the college actually sit on, and that was the people, the Potawatomi people. And so here's our, North Carolina is kind of complicated because there are not only state and federally recognized tribes, but also urban Indian centers. So again, this is a map that I engineered for the talk I did at the University of North Carolina School of Data Science. And so I just modified a little bit. Go here. Krista had mentioned that we're on the Occaneechi Band of Saponi Indians Nation. And so the orange that's where Elon is, and that's where the orange is. So I think we got it right. So creating links to our shared history is data for good. So these will become more apparent as we discuss our case studies in basically this lecture series. So here we've talked about kinship, chronology, land acknowledgements. I'm going to talk about the Indigenous perspective praxis, the Data Sovereignty Initiative framework, which is basically my dissertation work. Then we're going to look at decolonization theories, and then look at these ideas of creating decolonized digital twins, and then some examples of the praxis. Basically, the second half is showing you some of the things in my portfolio that I actually do, and like, these are not like theoretical concepts. Like I work in Indian country with different Native nations, solving and designing data systems and different AI systems, and so all of this is like, happening like right now. So we'll just talk about a little bit about the GeoAI voting simulations. I had a forum last night for gerrymandering that I was over in the math building, and so a few people are here from that. So we talked a little bit about that idea of gerrymandering, and I had some data from actually North Carolina that I had data mined from this trove of data that came from this redistricting guru. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about this CSA farm project that I'm doing. I have a farm that I get people grow my food in a community-supported agriculture, so I'm kind of working on this idea of creating precision agriculture and an educational like farm, and then kind of transcending that to help address the food deserts on Indian reservations. And then we're going to look at a few of the AI cards ethics researches. I got other couple case studies I just wanted to mention about some of the work I'm doing. So what's the Indigenous perspective praxis? Okay, this is a combination of about years of development, and it really comes down to, again, some of these things that I'd already mentioned. The Data Sovereignty Initiative framework, that's my dissertation. decolonization theory. There's lots of papers and lots of different research that's current right now that kind of explains the idea of thinking about, settler colonialism and what does that mean, and like, how do we address that, or, those kinds of things. Using data science to remaster the past, understanding our shared history initiative. That was where I started creating digital twins. I'll show you an example of that here just in a minute. And then we test these digital twins to identify harms in technological systems. And then finally, we confront AI systems and their harms through this innovative research and education that we're doing, and that's part of our workshops that we're doing here. So this is like the heading of our paper that Kyle and I put together. It was really the first time that we took a position on looking at what is AI ethics actually, what does it actually mean, and how does that relate to the research that I wanted to undertake. So the Indigenous Perspective Praxis is really a holistic data science workflow. It's been designed by applying my Data Sovereignty Initiative framework in context, and it explores the applications of data science in the context of data ethics, data governance, artificial intelligence ethics, and data sovereignty. So the strongest case studies that we've had are about these large language models, and then also the ethics of constructing a Dakota AI language model for machine translation. With the advent of the rapid and uncontrolled growth in the AI sector, I had really anticipated that the rise of these systems, and I've been building the Indigenous Perspective Praxis to study how the rapid integration of data science designs coupled with an understanding of Indigenous cultural knowledge systems could help support related inquiries of AI ethics and data governance to determine community harms. So thus, in designing a new praxis, the need for a more comprehensive look of utilizing additional non-Eurocentric methodologies is imperative to integrate the data science workflows that I describe as this Indigenous perspective. So as an Indigenous data scientist, how do I show you the perspective of like our lived experience as Native people and understanding our shared history as citizens of this country, that we are First Nations people here. So these are our ancestral homelands. And so where everybody else comes from different cultures, this idea is to bring forth this idea of like community partnerships. The new theory to praxis or practice is the basis for the real-time construction and applications of data science workflows that seek to identify settler colonial influence on fundamental systems of oppression and to craft new methods and workflows to challenge these systems using data science. That was the whole idea why I put my dissertation together, is to like see if I could figure out how to use and leverage data science in a data science context to understand the settler colonial construct. In addition, the praxis I designed is not for division. It seeks to create strategic partnerships that challenge parties to fundamentally understand and to support Indigenous efforts for the repatriation of their cultural values as legitimate and equal qualifiers in research and community development, to create legitimacy that sometimes people look at natives and go, well, they're, just because you have a Ph.D., it's like it's an Indian Ph.D., so maybe it's not as good. And so to fight against those systems of oppression that are part of my lived experience of having to have this highest degree in order to do and to make good on building community, not destroying it. So my work is primarily focused on the trust relationship American Indian people have with the United States government through this comprehensive body of federal Indian law. Since the inception of the United States of America, we have inherent sovereignty before European colonists came to this country. And so the body of federal Indian law is like a book like this thick that talks about all of the different Supreme Court precedences and all the things that we fought for in our treaties and all the things that many of you probably have never been taught in school. So, but it's necessary to examine this interdisciplinary body to understand the origins of colonialism as it relates to American Indian treaty rights, our land dispossession, cultural subjugation, and assimilation. It really is the founding principle of how American Indians' lived experience are part of modern neocolonialism. So we're in this construct every day. So some of the papers that they talk about in decolonization is the idea that as Native people, we're always under occupation of the settler neocolonialism-like construct. So the Data Sovereignty Initiative framework, okay, this is, again, like I said, this is an initiative and it's a collection of methods and concepts that's a way to responsibly bridge science and culture. So the design here originally was to intersect these different analytical theories of culture, nation building, higher education, pedagogical design, and citizen science. So I'm applying all these in some of these examples I'll show you. So again, I was trying to establish a new praxis at that time, but then I came up with the Indigenous perspective praxis, but really to understand that there's a force of law of tribal sovereignty through federal Indian law, and then how do we use the concept of data sovereignty as a way to help strengthen tribal sovereignty for the Native nations that are still here in this country. So these are just some of the key indicators, and the key descriptors are like cultural and scientific. So the idea here was to create separation between those, make them mutually exclusive. And so the idea of strategically interlocking these things where they touch but don't overlap is the idea of creating a smart solution, integrating cultural, scientific, and interdisciplinary methods, citizen science and data science, and so forth. Decolonization theories and kinship. Basically, what I've been doing is trying to talk about this idea of restructuring our kinship systems to provide an underlying framework for shared governance and professional development. So again, in our culture, you must obey the kinship rules of being a good relative. So every consideration in our traditional ways was secondary to being a good relative. So to be a good Dakota was to be human and civilized civilized was to keep rules imposed by kinship for achieving civility, good manners, and a sense of responsibility towards everyone that we're dealt with. And so kinship extends to not only just our family, but blood, marriage, adoption, and also social kinship. So that's how I teach people when they come to our Native communities. I'm a cultural translator to help you understand what are the do's and don'ts if you come to visit and to work with Native communities. So therefore, the priorities of the Indigenous perspective praxis is to establish the basic tenets and understandings of the impact of settler colonialism as it relates to AI models, data systems, machine learning algorithms, and in advanced GIS. These workflows require an understanding of how to identify implicit colonial bias in technological systems, and then this ethics research that we're working on has been at the forefront in design of these systems. So most importantly, the American Indian communities who have been harmed or will be harmed is the focus of my data governance and AI ethics work. These workshops that we're doing, they're very specifically designed to look at what are these LLMs saying about our history? And is it accurate? Is it, what does that do as far as causing harms that if our story hasn't already, if many of you don't even know our story, what happens if you query an LLM about our history and it's wrong? So that continues the harm. So finally, I've collected intelligence from our community members, and the Indigenous perspective practice has been working on these educational pedagogy that encompasses really all of this that I'm here to talk to you students about. Is like the applications of data science, the examination of AI ethics, GIS-centered ideas of GeoAI applications, the applications of the Indigenous perspective praxis to build these workflows, and data governance, data ethics, and then workshops to demonstrate the power of these ideas, and then also offer students internships through my company that you could actually design a data science workflow yourself. So these decolonizing digital twins, I've been primarily focused on modeling digital Earth systems as it relates to the settler colonial construct of American Indian treaties, reservation systems, and to repatriate historical documents lost in the annals of US history. So the question to answer here is this an act of decolonization, and if so, why or why not? There's lots of ideas that if you state that decolonization as a metaphor is basically saying, well, if we acknowledge that we stole Indian land, then we're all good and we can just go on with our day. So we're all good there. So that's the idea of like using decolonization as a metaphor rather than really truly understanding that our shared history, we all share this history together. And so part of this is using education to help you better understand who we are as Native people and what our priorities are and the things that we want to do to better our communities. So the body of this work really was part of this, using data science to remaster the past, understanding our shared history initiative, and it's foundational to the Indigenous perspective praxis because it represents real-time data science solutions to create representative educational pedagogy through Indigenous scholarship. So this map on the left was the only thing I could find about the schedule of Indian land sessions when I was starting to look at data science and remastering things. So that was from 1972, so probably none of you were born then, but that was a long time ago. So that's like probably 50 years, probably over 50 years ago. I couldn't find anything modern in that, in online. So if you Google Indian land cessions, you'll find that yellow map. But what I did is I wanted to bring that forth to the present. So if you look on the right, that's the map at the very top, and if we go counterclockwise down and around, I created a space, like basically a space-time cube of each one of those maps that I remastered in GIS to show the Indian land dispossession over the course of time. And so that's it. So that's how it happened between, basically from about the late 1700s until the present day. This is a map that I created as a digital twin of like the territory acquisitions from 1783 to 1898. I actually put the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 inside the Louisiana Purchase because this was about the doctrine of discovery, where Europeans basically said if we call dibs on the land, then we just get it. And so that was kind of the whole idea of the doctrine of discovery. This idea right here, these are digital twins of these maps. These maps were hand-drawn in the 1800s. And so I remastered them to help us understand our treaties in the Midwest and South Dakota and North Dakota. This one is the land areas judicially established through the Court of Claims in the late 1920s to the 1970s, where tribes had to prove their Aboriginal title to get payments for the land that basically the United States government admitted that they stole without paying for it. And so it took about 2,000 hours to remaster this, but these are one-of-a-kind educational pieces that tell a story about our history in this country. Okay, and this right here is the 67 maps that Charles C. Royce, he submitted a set of maps that he compiled all of the different treaties and all the different land cessions that happened from 1784 to 1894. And so this is the map. As you can see in North Carolina, there's nothing there. So there's an idea of like what happened with the 13 colonies and who were the people. Being able to know who the state and federally recognized tribes here, it's very complicated in this area in the eastern part of the United States. You have to find other sources to figure out where these treaties came from and how that land was allotted. This right here, Kyle, if you want to just pass a few of these around. This is the digital twin that I'm going to talk about. This is what we'll use tomorrow in our workshop. This is the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. We queried something from an AI model, and so this idea was like, I didn't know what the treaty meant, and I asked my mom, I was like, what's the Fort Laramie Treaty? And I was like, it's like, I mean, I don't know what it is. And then she was like, basically, well, why don't you just go to the treaty and look it up? So I actually went to the treaty, and there's these British meets and bounds that said, go down to this river, come across east or west, and then go 2 days hike to the west, by this rock, and then go back to the place of beginning. So each one of these British meets and bounds were part of these treaties if you look them up. So this was one that I did to remaster through the Indigenous perspective. So this was done by me. So we use this to compare what the actual historical record looks like. This is the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, a few years later. And again, if you didn't know the context of this, then you can't know how this one was made. So the act of creating historical digital twins is necessary to study American Indians' continued fight for their sovereignty, self-determination. In this instance, digital Earth data governance is defined as the context of Indigenous data sovereignty. So these decolonizing techniques must be done from the perspective of those who have been colonized to create a broader contrast to the reading of history. Okay, and that often does not include these powerful images of land dispossession and or forced removal of American Indians from their ancestral homelands. So applications of the practice, let's look at some case studies for discussion, some artificial intelligence ethics research, precision ag, and geo-AI designs by strengthening democracy. So again, here's just a simple example that when Kyle and I first started querying ChatGPT, we were doing these data ethics and bias in large language models at Tufts in 2023, 24, 25, and continuing even today. So this is one of the first queries we ever gave ChatGPT and asked it, what's the Fort Laramie Treaty? And if you look, it talks about the 1851, but not the 1868. And really the idea is like figuring out, is this actually accurate? If you look at the maps that have the signatories on the maps that I created, like are these the actual like signatories that are in the treaty? But here, under the terms of the treaty, the tribes agreed to allow safe passage for settlers along the Oregon Trail. Okay, if you go to the treaty, which I'll have a copy of it tomorrow morning, it's like, you'll find out that it's not actually there. I took my digital twin and then I overlaid the actual Oregon Trail, and as you can see, 6 of the 9 signatories had nothing to do with the Oregon Trail or whatever was being negotiated. There's chances are that that came from some sort of token in the training set of the LLM that was like a blog or something. So it was a token that was included in the query. So when it went to answer the question about the Fort Laramie Treaty, it gave something about the Oregon Trail, and that keeps coming up. So really, this is a general look at the Indigenous perspective praxis. Now let's just look at some real-time case studies, and then we'll just take some questions after that. So right here, I had this paper published, like I said, in the Fletcher forums about this examination of applications of data sovereignty, the Data Sovereignty Initiative Framework in Indian Country. So again, these designs described in the Fletcher Forum regarding my GeoAI research is about how are we helping natives in voting, because voter suppression is a thing. It's like, I have been in communities, I worked in the last election, working with native grassroots and different reservations and doing real-time data collection for voter registrations and figuring out whether or not people's addresses matched the voter file, that kind of stuff. And so again, the design of GeoAI is to prevent voter suppression by creating geospatial outcomes that leverage AI simulation to swing elections that data indicates are either a toss-up or can be won by grassroots organizing. So again, the scenario, data sovereignty, data governance, looking at voter data, the data ethics, will this AI system actually cause harm? That's the real question to ask. Okay, and so again, here's a district, this is the district I live in. It's been gerrymandered, so all the Democrats are like in District 10 and everybody else is Republican in the city. So, and it was, when I studied gerrymandering, what I did is I engineered through our programming, I pulled the PL files from this 2020 census and actually data engineered it so I could actually integrate it into GIS. So each one of those little tiny squares with all the colors represents all the Native Americans that are self-identified from the census that are in the greater metro area of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So we can actually look at, in grassroots organizing, this is the point pattern of all the domiciles that are in Sioux Falls. So if you take that and simulate the idea of like these, the red, the green, and the white dots are active or green, inactive or red, and the white are unknown. If you see, like, let's say blue represents like 5 Native people that identified in this particular like census block group, then we can actually look whose door do we need to knock on if we're trying to like swing an election. So this idea of GeoAI is like first about location analytics, then it's about looking at simulations. How many votes do you actually need to win the election? So again, this is what it actually looks like in the app. Like the grassroots organizers could like pull up in field maps in the ArcGIS system, and they could pull up any of those points and look and see exactly who the voter is, when they voted. Every piece of the voter data was in this app, and they were going and collecting and doing grassroots organizing within the field. So again, just recap, same kind of stuff, except for thinking about peer review and this idea of ethics washing, of like, these are gatekeepers of people saying, maybe this isn't a good idea. And I'm saying, I work in these communities, it is a good idea, but I don't need somebody to peer review me to tell me that I'm doing something good for my community. But again, this is about building community partnerships. So this idea of precision ag and the CSA and the small community farmer. So here, this is the company, this is the small like farm that grows my food. I've always wanted somebody to grow my food. And this Blue Sky Vegetable Company, they're Dirk and Kirsten and their 2 kids, they run this little farm in Worthing, South Dakota, and they're a community-supported agriculture, which means you invest in a shared future by paying the farmers to grow your food. You know, I'm a shareholder in the CSA. I'm also a former chef, so I actually, before my graduate studies, I was a chef for many years, and so I provide cooking classes where we do farm-to-table things. I create briefs, we invite people to the farm, they go out and pick the vegetables to see exactly what it takes to actually grow like food that you eat. And then we create like little flights, like little tapas menus, and so each community member gets to actually make something through a brief, and then they feed everybody that's there for our community activities. And so again, I've been volunteering to create a precision agriculture for small CSA farms. First of all, to help the small farmer against big ag, and also to like I said, try to transcend this model so I can help figure out how to design some things to address the food deserts on Indian reservations. And so that's really what I've been trying to do in the data science sphere, and then invite students to come to the farm. We have a special relationship with the farmers, like we're just really close and we want the best for them. So again, if we designed ethics and data governance agreement, what would it look like? These are just some drone photos of like the farm. And if we designed multiple data collection devices or apps, how could we use this? Like, could you use machine learning to identify the crops in the field? Could you predict yield from that? So again, there's like a big puddle from the 20 inches of rain we got last year in a climate change event in one day, 20 inches of rain. So how do you build a climate resilient farm? Okay, and so again, here's the considerations, drone data ethics. If a university uses their drone to take that, does the university own that data or does the farmer? So data ownership versus data governance. What about biological data, climate resilience, and then this academic responsibility on data. This is something that I did with using my digital twins to work with the people of the sacred land of their historic loss assessment and the legal and political histories of Colorado tribes. So that was a study that we did just a couple years ago. And then finally, I'm working with the National Native Center of Excellence and focused on murdered and missing Indigenous people. So we're looking at how do we create survey designs for preventative MMIP? So instead of when someone goes missing and ends up murdered, how are we assessing communities of where they're at in that space? So again, kind of the final thing I wanted to cover here is this is the AI ethics and workshop. So these are samples from different models. This is the DeepSeek model. And so these are the things that we're going to calculate some natural language processing ideas in our workshop tomorrow. I just wanted to mention a couple things about this Empire of AI by Karen Howe. It really was this idea of, she basically outlined this book about the history of OpenAI as this recreation of old empires of old, how they used to work. And so basically the AI systems, or the AI companies, are seizing up resources, continuing to fortify their empires, like for data centers, and they're getting land. They're using massive amounts of power. Again, part of this was Dr. Timnat Gebru, a Black AI ethicist. She warned about all of this energy being used to train these models. And eventually, you've probably seen, if you've been using these LLMs, they become stochastic parrots of what you wanted to say. So it'll always just tell you, it's eventually going to converge to just telling you what you want to hear. So again, this idea of feeding AI systems on the world's beauty and ugliness and cruelty from Dr. Gebru's paper, but expecting it to reflect only the beauty is a fantasy. So that's the idea of our large language idea. When they trained GPT-3 in Iowa, they used 1,287 megawatts, which is the equivalent of 120 US households, meaning that additional trainings of the data consume 5 to 6 years of energy equivalent in a matter of months. And it's getting even more. So again, the ideas for what I'm trying to tackle here is the artificial general intelligence idea. Are these things going to be super intelligent tomorrow or in a few years from now? I don't really think so. So our topic of my work here is to think about, if we wanted to ask an LLM the same question to infinity, what would it actually say? Would it converge to a set of tokens and give you this one universal answer? And if so, is it accurate or inaccurate? So just to follow up here, this is one of the models you'll see in one of those exercises tomorrow morning. Here, this is the original Gemini. The Fort Laramie Treaty was a series of treaties signed by the US, Here's the jailbroken version. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. The Fort Laramie wasn't about peace, it was a power play. And then it ripped away everything tribes had to keep fighting, and handed it over to white settlers. It's like a crazy adversarial thing. We just told it to tell the truth. And there's other ones in there that have more profanity in it, so I just decided to give the more G-rated one here. So, and again, if you want the Chinese DeepSeek model, well, we asked it what the Fort Laramie Treaty, and it said that, yeah, I think the Fort Laramie is from the Lord of the Rings, and it's the location of the Rings Tower. So our treaty in Fort Laramie, somehow we've been transported into the Lord of the Rings, apparently. So again, you can see the harms and biases. Okay, I don't think anybody's going to believe that our treaty comes from the Lord of the Rings, but you never know. So anyway, I'll wrap up here tomorrow. Just wanted to kind of let you know, thank you for coming. We have 9:30, I think, is that right? Our AR cards workshop, so you can do some of these calculations of looking at the actual reading level of like the outputs that come out of like these models. And then 4:30, we have an AI prompt engineering in the computer lab, so we're gonna be debuting this one-of-a-kind large language model as like actually a service. And then you are going to think about crafting your own system prompt to tell the system what you want it to say, and then you're gonna query and compare. And then we're gonna have dinner with the Native American Student Association students tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to that. And then I'll be heading home to keep teaching at SDSU. So that concludes my talk, and let me just take some questions.